The rancher saved 3 Apache women 10 years ago. Today they returned. Marry us. John Miller had always been a man of quiet routines. His days began long before the sun peeked over the horizon. The soft light of dawn would filter through the wide windows of his small ranch house, casting gentle golden beams across the wooden floors. With a sigh that was half contentment and half weariness, he would tie his worn boots and step outside into the crisp morning air. The smell of dew on the grass, the distant calls of birds, and the soft rustle of cattle grazing in the pastures greeted him like old friends. The ranch was large but manageable for one man. Stretching over rolling hills and valleys, it had been in his family for generations. Though much of it required constant attention, John never minded the work. In fact, there was a comfort in the routine, the rhythm of feeding the animals, checking the fences, repairing broken gates, and guiding the cattle from one field to another. It was a simple life, but it was a good life. It gave him peace and a sense of purpose, even if it was lonely at times. One summer afternoon, the air heavy with the warmth of the season, John decided to check the outer fences along the canyon that bordered his land. He often did this walk alone, relishing the quiet, the soft crunch of dirt under his boots, and the distant murmur of a stream that wound through the valley. The land was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way, with jagged cliffs and twisting paths leading to secret spots where wildflowers grew and deer sometimes grazed. John loved it all. He felt connected to the earth beneath his feet in a way that few people ever understood. As he walked along the edge of the canyon, he noticed the sky beginning to darken unnaturally fast. Thick, heavy clouds rolled in from the west, and the once calm stream at the bottom of the valley began to rush violently, churning white foam against the rocks. John's heart tightened. He had seen sudden storms before, but there was something different about this one. The wind picked up, tugging at his hat and whipping dust into his eyes. He quickened his pace, knowing the animals and fences could be in danger. Then he heard it, a scream, faint but unmistakable, carried over the roar of the wind and water. John froze, straining to catch the sound again. There it was, a sharp, terrified cry that made his stomach knot. Without a second thought, he sprinted toward the sound, his boots slipping over wet soil and loose stones. Around the next bend, he saw them. 3 young women, their clothing soaked and clinging to their skin, were clinging to each other near the edge of the swollen stream. The water was rising fast, and the current was dangerously strong. They were stranded on a narrow ledge of rock, with the water rushing perilously close. John's mind raced, but his body moved before he even had a chance to think. He dropped his bag, grabbed a sturdy rope from his saddle, and carefully made his way down the slope, keeping his footing on the slippery stones. The wind howled, tearing at his jacket, and the rain began to fall in thick sheets, but he didn't hesitate. "Hold on." "I've got you," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. The women looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, uncertainty and hope mingling in their gaze. "Please help us," one of them cried, her voice trembling. John nodded firmly. "I'm going to get you out of here. Just stay calm and don't let go of each other." The first woman was the smallest of the 3. Her hands shook as she reached for the rope John had secured to a tree. He guided her carefully, instructing her where to step, how to lean against him, and when to trust the rope. Slowly, carefully, she began to move, one cautious step at a time. The water roared below them, but John's focus was unwavering. He could feel the raw power of the storm around him, but the lives of these women mattered more than anything else in that moment. Next came the second woman, who was taller and stronger. She tried to move faster, but the fear in her eyes made her hesitate. John encouraged her gently, speaking words of comfort he hadn't realized he was capable of. "You can do this. Just follow my lead. I won't let anything happen to you." Her fingers gripped the rope tightly, and step by step, John led her to safety. The third woman was the most terrified. She had fallen slightly behind, her legs trembling, her face pale. John reached out, taking her hand firmly, letting her lean on him as they carefully made their way to solid ground. Finally, all three women were safe, huddled together, soaked but alive. John helped them stand, steadying them against the wind. He looked at their faces, seeing relief, gratitude, and something more, something he couldn't quite name but felt deep in his chest. They were silent for a moment, catching their breath, the storm still raging around them. Then, in a mixture of broken English and their native language, one of them whispered, "Thank you, life saved." John shook his head, brushing rain from his eyes. It was nothing, just doing what anyone would do. He felt awkward, unused to such gratitude. He wasn't a hero, he was just a man trying to help. But when he saw the tears in their eyes, he realized that what he had done mattered more than he thought. The women introduced themselves slowly. Their names were little more than a whisper to him, but he remembered them because of the way they clung together, their bravery shining despite their fear. They told him they had been traveling through the canyon when the storm hit unexpectedly. They had tried to find shelter, but the flood came too fast, and they were trapped. John listened, nodding, helping them stay calm as the storm continued to pour down around them. By the time the rain began to ease, John had guided them back to his ranch house, a small, sturdy building that smelled of wood smoke and leather. He wrapped them in blankets and offered them warm tea, though he didn't expect them to accept. The women, exhausted and shivering, accepted quietly, sitting close together by the fire. John could see the mud on their clothes, the dirt on their faces, and the fear still lingering in their eyes. He said little, giving them space to recover, but his heart ached with a strange tenderness for these strangers whose lives he had saved. Over the next few hours, he learned more about them. They came from a nearby Apache community and had been traveling to visit relatives. The storm had caught them unprepared and they had feared the worst. John listened quietly, nodding, offering small comforts, hot water, dry blankets, and his quiet presence. He didn't know how to explain why he had risked himself for them. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something deeper, a sense of duty he didn't fully understand. By the time night fell, the storm had passed. The air was cool, the ground wet, and the stars slowly began to peek through the clouds. John guided the women to a safe room in his house where they could rest. He made sure they had food and water, and as they finally drifted off to sleep, he felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. He hadn't expected thanks, recognition, or any reward. Saving their lives had been enough. That night, John sat by the window, staring out at the quiet canyon. The water had returned to its normal course, the trees swayed gently in the wind, and the world seemed calm again. But his mind lingered on the three women. Who were they really? How would their lives unfold from here? He couldn't know, and he didn't need to. He only knew that today he had done something important, and that was enough. The next morning, as the sun rose in a clear sky, the women were ready to leave. They thanked John again, this time more formally, bowing their heads in respect. He waved them off, feeling the odd emptiness that follows a meaningful encounter. He watched them disappear down the path, their figures growing smaller against the vast landscape, and he thought he might never see them again. But something inside him whispered that their paths might cross again, in ways he could never predict. And in that moment, John returned to his daily life on the ranch, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that courage and kindness, even in small acts, could leave a lasting mark. Years passed after that stormy afternoon on the canyon. John Miller continued his life on the ranch, following the steady rhythm of work, sun, and seasons. The days blurred together in the comforting routine of caring for the land, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and walking along trails that had become as familiar to him as the lines on his own hands. He liked the solitude. It gave him time to think, reflect, and appreciate the beauty of the world around him. The sunrise over the hills, the scent of wildflowers in spring, and the quiet, starlit nights became the steady heartbeat of his life. Though life was peaceful, The memory of the 3 Apache women who had once been caught in the flood occasionally drifted into John's mind. He remembered the fear in their eyes, the courage it had taken them to cling to each other in the rushing water, and the gratitude they had shown him. At the time, he had dismissed it all as a fleeting moment, a small act in a life full of work and solitude. Yet deep down, he sometimes wondered about them, where they were, how they were living, and whether the danger they had faced had changed them as much as it had changed him. As the years went on, John's life was punctuated by small events that reminded him of the world outside his ranch. A neighbor's wedding, a cattle auction, or the occasional visitor passing through the valley would stir memories of human connection he had mostly left behind. He found himself thinking about friendship, loyalty, and the bonds that people form in the most unexpected circumstances. Though he had never married and had no family of his own, he felt a quiet satisfaction in the life he had built, a life of honesty, hard work, and connection to the land. The ranch itself grew and changed. John planted new trees along the creek, repaired old barns, and even expanded the pastures to allow more room for the cattle to roam. He was proud of what he had accomplished, but he also noticed that the work left him lonelier than it used to. Sometimes, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, he would sit on his porch and watch the shadows stretch across the fields. In those moments, he felt the absence of companionship more acutely, though he never admitted it to anyone, not even to himself. Meanwhile, in the Apache community, the 3 women grew into strong, independent women. The memory of that day in the canyon stayed with them, not as a story to tell casually, but as a reminder of the kindness and bravery of a stranger who had risked everything to save their lives. They often spoke of him in private, sharing quiet moments of reflection about the man who had become a symbol of courage in their minds. Over time, they achieved their own successes, learning trades, helping their families, and becoming respected members of their community. Yet they never forgot John Miller. The bond created in that single moment of crisis had stayed with them through the years, like an invisible thread connecting their lives. As life continued in parallel, John's routine was interrupted one bright morning when he noticed something unusual on the horizon. 3 figures were walking along the path that led to his ranch, their pace steady, their presence unmistakable. At first he thought he was imagining it, that the years had played tricks on his mind. But as the figures drew closer, a strange familiarity struck him. The women were older now, grown into confident and self-assured adults, but the memory of the fear and gratitude in their eyes during the storm returned instantly. His heart skipped a beat, and he felt an unfamiliar mix of curiosity and nervousness. By the time they reached the ranch, John had walked down the path to greet them. He stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. The women paused as well, their eyes scanning the ranch, taking in the landscape that had been a backdrop to a life-changing moment. Then, in unison, they spoke their names and reminded John of the day he had saved them. There was no anger, no expectation, only a quiet, steady acknowledgement of the past. John felt a rush of emotion he could barely describe. It was as if a chapter of his life, long closed, had suddenly reopened, bringing with it memories and feelings he thought he had left behind. The 3 women explained that they had traveled a long distance to find him. They did not reveal every detail at once, choosing instead to speak slowly, carefully, as if testing the waters of a reunion that had waited a decade to happen. They spoke of their gratitude, their lives since that day, and the ways in which his act of bravery had shaped their paths. John listened quietly, humbled by their words, and realized that their gratitude went deeper than mere thanks. It was a recognition of a bond that had been forged in the most extreme circumstances. As the day passed, John led them around the ranch, showing them the improvements he had made and sharing stories of life on the land. The women listened intently, asking questions and laughing at small moments of humor, their presence bringing warmth and life to the ranch that had been quiet for so long. John found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, telling them about his work, the challenges of the land, and even his own quiet dreams. In their company, he felt a connection he had not realized he was missing. Over meals and shared conversation, the women revealed more about their lives. They had faced difficulties, as everyone does, but they had also experienced success and growth. They had learned skills, developed careers, and become strong, independent individuals. Yet despite all of this, the memory of that day in the canyon, the fear, the courage, and John's selfless bravery remained a defining moment for them. It was a reminder that kindness could ripple through life in unexpected ways, shaping futures in ways that were impossible to predict. John, for his part, reflected on the decade that had passed. He realized that life on the ranch, while peaceful, had kept him in a kind of solitude that was both comforting and limiting. He had built a life of hard work and quiet achievement, but it had been a life without shared human connection. Seeing these women again, hearing their stories, and feeling the gratitude that radiated from them, made him question the boundaries he had set around his own heart. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant hues of orange and purple, the women gathered by the porch with John, looking out over the vast expanse of the ranch. For a long moment, they simply watched, letting the quiet beauty of the land and the rhythm of life sink in. It was a moment of peace, reflection, and connection, a moment that felt as though it had been waiting 10 years to arrive. In that moment, John realized that the past was not just a memory. It was a living force, shaping the present in ways he could not ignore. The lives of the three women had been touched by his actions, and now, in turn, their presence was touching his life. It was a reminder that the choices we make, even in a single instant, can create ripples that reach far into the future. By the time night fell, John invited the women to stay at the ranch for the evening. They accepted, expressing appreciation for his hospitality and the warmth of his home. As they settled in, sharing stories and laughter late into the night, John felt a sense of fulfillment and connection that he had not experienced in years. It was a quiet but profound reminder that life, in all its challenges and unpredictability, often has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. The night passed with calm and comfort, the stars twinkling above the ranch as if acknowledging the reunion that had taken place. John lay awake for a while, thinking about the journey of the past 10 years, the storms, the solitude, the work, and now this unexpected reconnection. He realized that life's meaning often comes not from the grand gestures or monumental achievements, but from the quiet, human connections that endure across time and distance. The morning sun rose over the ranch, casting golden light over the fields, the hills, and the cattle grazing peacefully. The women were awake early, moving quietly through the house as John prepared breakfast. There was a gentle familiarity in their movements, a sense that even after 10 years, some bonds remain unbroken. They laughed together, shared stories, and planned the day ahead, exploring the ranch and rediscovering the land that had once been a place of danger, but was now a place of connection and warmth. As they worked and shared the day together, John felt a growing sense of purpose beyond his usual routine. The women's presence brought energy, conversation, and laughter to the ranch, transforming it from a place of quiet solitude into a space filled with life and shared experience. He realized that the world was larger than his own boundaries, that human connection could bring joy and meaning in ways he had long forgotten. By the end of the day, John understood that the reunion was more than a chance encounter. It was a turning point, a moment where the past and present intertwined, offering the possibility of a future he had never imagined. The memory of the storm, the rescue, and the courage of those three young women had returned to his life, bringing with it a promise of connection, gratitude, and perhaps even something more. An unfolding story that was only just beginning. The days following the reunion passed in a blur of activity and conversation on John Miller's ranch. The three women were no longer strangers. Their presence had settled comfortably into the rhythm of his daily life, almost as if they had always belonged there. Each morning, John awoke to the soft light filtering through the windows and the gentle sounds of life moving around him. The women preparing breakfast, the cattle lowing in the fields, the wind rustling the trees. For the first time in years, he felt that his quiet world had expanded, that it had become richer and warmer without him even realizing it. Despite the calm and joy that filled the ranch, John could not ignore the unusual nature of this reunion. 10 years had passed since he had saved their lives, yet they had returned, seeking him out with a determination he could not fully comprehend. He often found himself stealing glances at them as they worked side by side in the fields or tended to the animals. Their eyes, bright and full of life, carried a mixture of gratitude, respect, and something else he couldn't quite name. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, yet he felt its weight. One afternoon, as the sun burned high in the clear blue sky, John walked with them along the ridge that overlooked the valley. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass, and the view stretched endlessly, a patchwork of fields, forests, and distant hills. He could see the pride in their faces as they looked at the land, the ranch, and the home that he had built. For a moment, he felt a quiet pride himself, realizing how much life had changed since that day a decade ago, how many small moments had shaped the paths that had led them all here. They spoke of their lives in the years since the flood, the challenges they had faced, the accomplishments they had achieved, and the lessons they had learned. John listened, fascinated by their stories, impressed by their courage and resilience. He had expected gratitude and perhaps some curiosity, but he did not expect such depth, such intelligence, or such warmth. Their words carried wisdom far beyond their years, shaped by experience, hardship, and survival. As they talked, John felt an unexpected bond growing stronger, a connection that went beyond the simple act of saving their lives. Yet, amid the calm, a sense of anticipation lingered. John sensed that the women had a purpose in returning, something beyond mere gratitude. They spoke carefully, choosing their words as though testing the waters, revealing just enough to keep him intrigued but not so much as to overwhelm him. He could feel the tension building quietly in the air, like the moments before a storm, and he realized that his life was on the verge of change in ways he had not imagined. That evening, they sat together by the fire in John's living room. The flames flickered, casting warm light on the walls, and the shadows danced in patterns that seemed alive. They talked, laughed, and shared stories of their childhoods, their families, and their dreams. John found himself opening up more than he had with anyone in years. He spoke of the ranch, of his solitude, and of the life he had built with his own hands. The women listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering their own perspectives, creating a dialogue that was both intimate and enlightening. As the night deepened, the conversation turned more personal. One of the women, the eldest, spoke softly, her voice carrying a weight of seriousness that caught John's attention. She reminded him of the day he had saved them and the courage it had taken, not just on his part, but on theirs as well. They had faced fear and uncertainty, yet they had survived, and it was because of his bravery that they had a chance to continue their lives. John nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and pride, understanding the depth of their words and the sincerity behind them. The other two women added their voices, emphasizing that their return was not accidental. They had spent years reflecting on the bond created that day in the canyon, a bond forged in fear, trust, and life-saving courage. They explained that their decision to come back was deliberate, a choice made after careful thought and consideration. John listened in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of what they were saying. It was clear that this reunion was more than a simple visit. It was the beginning of something significant, something that had been waiting for a decade to unfold. Over the next few days, John noticed subtle changes in the dynamic of the ranch. The women moved with confidence, their laughter echoing across the fields, their presence bringing life and warmth to every corner of the property. They were not merely guests. They were active participants in the daily work, tending to the animals, helping with repairs, and even suggesting improvements that John had not considered. Their energy was infectious, their dedication inspiring. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of shared purpose, a feeling that he was part of a larger, connected world rather than existing in solitude. Yet, with all this growth and connection, an undercurrent of tension persisted. John could sense that the women were preparing to reveal something important, something that would change the course of their lives and his, forever. He felt a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and excitement. The anticipation was like a quiet hum in the background, a subtle pressure that grew stronger with each passing day. He found himself thinking about them constantly, wondering what they had in mind, and realizing that he was no longer content to remain in the same routine he had known for so long. One morning, as they walked along the stream that ran through the ranch, one of the women paused and turned to him. Her eyes held a seriousness that made John stop in his tracks. She spoke with a clarity and directness that made his heart race. She reminded him once again of the debt of life they owed him, the bond that had been created, and the gratitude that had carried them through the years. John nodded, listening intently, sensing that the moment he had been anticipating had finally arrived. The women then revealed their intentions. They explained that in their culture, a life saved was a debt of the deepest honor and respect. They wished to repay that debt in a meaningful way, not with money or gifts, but by offering themselves to him in a bond that was traditional, sincere, and profound. John listened, trying to comprehend the weight of their words. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, a proposal that challenged his understanding of relationships, loyalty, and human connection. John felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, confusion, awe, and even a touch of fear. He had never imagined that the act of saving their lives could lead to such a moment. And yet, standing there in the sun-drenched fields, he could see the sincerity in their eyes, the honesty in their words. They were not asking for something casual or trivial. They were offering a deep, lifelong bond, a connection built on gratitude, trust, and shared history. For hours they spoke, clarifying their intentions, answering his questions, and sharing their thoughts about what such a bond would mean. John realized that this was not a decision to be taken lightly. It was a choice that would alter the course of all their lives, a turning point that demanded careful thought and reflection. Yet, he could also feel the truth in their offer, the authenticity that could not be ignored. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted with shades of orange and gold, John sat alone on the porch, thinking. The world was quiet, the ranch bathed in twilight, and the gentle sounds of the cattle and the wind in the trees provided a soothing backdrop for his thoughts. He reflected on the past 10 years, the storm, the rescue, the women's lives, and his own. He realized that every step had led to this moment, a moment where courage, gratitude, and human connection intersected in a way that was both profound and unexpected. By the time night fell, John had made a decision to listen, to understand, and to approach the situation with an open heart and mind. He knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps difficult choices, but he also knew that life had a way of offering opportunities that could not be ignored. The women's return, their presence, and their intentions had created a turning point, a moment that would redefine his understanding of loyalty, love, and family. As he drifted to sleep that night, John felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. He knew that the coming days would be unlike anything he had experienced, that the bond offered to him carried a weight of responsibility and meaning. Yet he also felt a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope that life could hold more than he had imagined, that human connection could transform even the quietest, most solitary existence into something vibrant, full, and meaningful. The next morning, John woke to the gentle light of dawn and the sound of the women moving through the house. Their presence was no longer a surprise. It was a part of life, as natural as the rising sun or the flowing stream. Yet he knew that the day ahead would be different. Something important was about to unfold, something that would change the course of their lives forever. And for the first time in a long time, John felt a sense of anticipation and excitement that he had not felt in years. The morning air was crisp and quiet, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant aroma of sun-warmed earth. John Miller walked along the familiar paths of his ranch, the rolling hills bathed in golden light. For days, the presence of the three women had filled his life with a sense of energy and anticipation he had never felt before. Yet, today felt different. There was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet weight that made his chest tighten and his heart beat a little faster. He could feel that something important was about to happen, though he did not yet know what it would be. The women moved gracefully through the morning light, tending to the cattle and the animals with care and precision. They had grown comfortable in the rhythm of the ranch, their laughter echoing softly over the fields, their voices mingling with the gentle lowing of cows and the soft rustle of leaves. But beneath the ease and warmth, John noticed a seriousness in their eyes, a determination that had not been there before. It was the same quiet strength he had seen in them during the flood, the courage that had helped them survive. Today, that courage seemed focused, purposeful, and directed entirely toward him. After breakfast, they asked him to walk with them to the edge of the canyon, the same place where 10 years ago their lives had been in peril. John followed, his mind racing with possibilities, each step heavier with anticipation than the last. As they reached the cliff's edge, he paused, taking in the view, the river below glinting in the sunlight, the trees swaying gently, the mountains standing silent in the distance. It was a beautiful scene, but John could feel that beauty was only the backdrop for a moment of far greater significance. The women stood together, side by side, looking at him with a quiet intensity. Their expressions were calm, yet their eyes carried a depth of feeling that John struggled to interpret. He could sense that what they were about to say would change everything. A soft wind blew, lifting strands of hair across their faces, but they did not move, standing firmly with purpose and poise. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant call of a hawk and the gentle rustle of leaves. Then with a shared glance and a deep breath they spoke. "John," the eldest said, her voice steady and clear, "we have returned for a reason. 10 years ago you saved our lives. You risked yourself to keep us safe, and we have never forgotten it. That act of courage changed our lives forever." She paused, looking directly into his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "We wish to honor that bond, to repay the debt of life you gave us, in a way that is meaningful to our hearts and our culture." John felt his pulse quicken. He understood their words, yet the weight of what they were implying was not something he had anticipated. He opened his mouth to speak, but they raised their hands gently, signaling him to listen. The second woman stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "We wish to offer ourselves to you, John. We ask that you accept us, not as guests, not as strangers, but as partners bound in respect, gratitude, and shared life. We want to marry you." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The wind whispered softly across the canyon. The river below sparkled in the sunlight, and John felt the weight of 10 years of solitude and hard work pressing against the sudden shock of the proposal. He blinked, unable to find words as the reality of what they were saying sank in. 3 women, the very ones whose lives he had saved, were asking him to join their lives forever, not as a fleeting gesture but as a serious, heartfelt commitment. John's mind raced. He thought about the life he had built on the ranch, the years of hard work and solitude, the quiet rhythms of his existence. He had never married, never shared his home with anyone, and the thought of sudden change filled him with both fear and curiosity. Yet he also felt the sincerity in their eyes, the honesty in their words, and the undeniable truth that they were speaking from the heart. This was not a request born of whim or fantasy. It was a choice they had made after years of reflection, respect, and gratitude. He swallowed hard, struggling to form his thoughts. I don't know what to say," he finally admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "This is unexpected. I never imagined, I never thought." The women smiled gently, not impatiently, but with understanding. They stepped closer, their presence grounding him, reminding him of the trust and courage that had defined their relationship from the very beginning. "We know this is not easy to hear," the third woman said softly, her voice warm and reassuring. "We know it may take time to understand, but our intention is true. We want to honor the bond that was created between us. We want to build a life together if you will accept it." John looked at them, seeing not just the faces of the women he had once saved, but the lives they had built in the years since. He saw strength, courage, loyalty, and a depth of emotion that went far beyond gratitude. And in that moment, he realized that this proposal was not simply about repayment. It was about connection, about the intertwining of lives in ways that could not be ignored. The 3 women moved to stand beside him, their hands folded respectfully, their eyes seeking his response. The wind carried their words and intentions across the canyon, a quiet but powerful current that seemed to press upon his very heart. John felt the weight of history, of courage, and of trust, all converging in this single moment. He understood that the choice before him was not just about himself, but about the lives of these women, their culture, and the promise that had been forged in the rushing waters of the canyon a decade ago. For hours they spoke, clarifying their intentions, answering his questions, and sharing their hopes for a life together. John listened, humbled by their thoughtfulness, amazed at the depth of their commitment, and slowly began to realize that this was not just an extraordinary offer. It was a chance for all of them to create something meaningful and lasting. He felt a mixture of fear and excitement, uncertainty and hope, all blending into a single, powerful emotion that he could not ignore. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon and painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, John knew he had reached a turning point. The choice he would make tonight would shape the rest of his life and theirs. The quiet ranch, the rolling hills, the fields of grazing cattle, all of it would never be the same again. And yet, for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of possibility, of life beyond solitude, of connection that could bring joy, love, and purpose in ways he had never imagined. That night they all sat together by the fire, the flames flickering and casting warm light across their faces. John spoke softly, sharing his thoughts, his fears, and his hopes. The women listened patiently, offering encouragement and understanding. They did not demand, they did not pressure. They simply shared the truth of their hearts, giving him the space and time to consider what it would mean to accept their proposal. As the hours passed, John felt a shift within himself. He realized that the women's offer was not only a gesture of gratitude, but an invitation to step into a life filled with connection, purpose, and shared joy. He thought about the moments of courage he had witnessed in the canyon, the resilience they had shown over the past 10 years, and the bond that had grown stronger despite distance and time. He understood that this was a rare and precious opportunity, one that could not be ignored or taken lightly. Finally, with the stars twinkling above and the quiet night surrounding them, John spoke. His voice was calm but filled with emotion, carrying the weight of thought, reflection, and newfound understanding. I accept, he said slowly, looking at each of the women in turn. I will honor the bond we share. I will accept you into my life, and together we will build something meaningful, something lasting. The women's faces lit up with joy, their smiles radiant and full of emotion. They stepped closer, each one taking his hand, and together they felt the profound connection that had been waiting to be acknowledged for 10 long years. It was a moment of triumph, of understanding, of love, and of courage, the culmination of a journey that had begun in the rushing waters of the canyon and had grown into a bond that would endure across time and life. In the quiet that followed, the ranch seemed to breathe with them, as if the land itself recognized the importance of the moment. The fire crackled, the night was still, and John felt a deep sense of peace, fulfillment, and anticipation for the life ahead. He knew that the journey would not always be easy, that challenges would come, and that hard work would be required. But he also knew that together they could face anything, and that the bond they shared would guide them through every difficulty and every joy. As they sat by the fire, the three women and John, a new chapter of life began. One built on trust, gratitude, love, and respect. One that promised shared days, shared dreams, and a shared future. And for John, who had once lived in quiet solitude, this was the beginning of a life that was vibrant, full, and alive with possibility. A life he could never have imagined, yet one he now embraced with his whole heart. The morning after the proposal was a quiet one, yet it was. Unlike any morning John Miller had ever experienced. The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills of the ranch, casting golden light across the pastures and illuminating the dew on the grass. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of excitement and purpose that went beyond the routine of work or the rhythm of the seasons. He looked around the ranch, the barns, the fields, the grazing cattle, and realized that everything was the same, yet somehow completely different. Life itself had changed, and so had he. The three women moved around the ranch with a natural ease, each of them taking part in the morning chores with care and attention. Their laughter echoed across the fields, carrying a warmth and joy that had been absent from the ranch for far too long. John watched them from the porch, a smile tugging at his lips, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The bond they shared was now official, recognized not just in words but in the quiet understanding that they were partners in life, ready to face the future together. Breakfast was a lively affair, filled with conversation, laughter, and gentle teasing. John noticed how easily they had integrated into the rhythm of the ranch, how naturally they had become a part of his daily life. The air was light, yet there was an undercurrent of purpose. They were building something together, a life rooted not just in survival or gratitude, but in respect, trust, and shared vision. John felt a surge of hope. For so many years, he had lived quietly, alone, but now he realized that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Over the next few weeks, the women worked alongside John, learning more about the ranch and sharing their own knowledge and skills. They tended the cattle, repaired fences, and even planted new crops in a small section of the land. Each day, John marveled at their strength, intelligence, and resilience. Their presence transformed the ranch into a place of laughter, learning, and connection. The land seemed to respond to their energy, the animals more lively, the fields more vibrant, and John felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building a life together with people you trust and respect. At night, they gathered by the fire, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. The women spoke of their childhoods, their families, and the challenges they had faced since the day of the flood. John shared his own memories, the struggles and triumphs of managing the ranch, and the quiet life he had led before their return. These moments of sharing deepened their bond, creating a foundation of understanding and empathy. John realized that love, trust, and companionship were not built in a single day, but in countless small moments, each one adding to the strength of their connection. One afternoon, as they walked along the stream that wound through the property, John reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. 10 years ago, he had acted instinctively to save 3 strangers from the flood, never imagining that this act of courage would lead to the life he now shared with them. He thought about the unpredictability of life, the way a single decision could ripple through time, creating opportunities, connections, and experiences far beyond what anyone could plan or imagine. The women, sensing his thoughts, smiled and took his hands. "We have always believed in fate," the eldest said softly. "That day, you saved our lives, and today we are here together, building a life that honors that bond. It is not just about gratitude, John. It is about creating something lasting, something beautiful together." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate deep within him. He understood that their lives were intertwined not by chance, but by courage, trust, and the choices they had made over the years. As the seasons changed, life on the ranch flourished. Spring brought new growth, with wildflowers blooming across the hills and fresh grass feeding the cattle. Summer was filled with warmth, hard work, and long days in the sun, punctuated by shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments by the stream. Autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, reminding them of the beauty of time passing and the importance of cherishing each moment. And winter, though cold and harsh, brought a sense of closeness as they huddled by the fire, sharing stories, plans, and dreams for the years ahead. Through it all, the bond between John and the women grew stronger. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's achievements, and faced the difficulties of ranch life as a team. John discovered strengths he had never known within himself: patience, understanding, and a deep capacity for love and compassion. The women, in turn, shared their wisdom, courage, and resilience, teaching John that family could be chosen, built on respect and trust rather than merely tradition. Neighbors and friends began to notice the change as well. The once quiet ranch was now alive with activity and warmth. People who visited commented on the laughter, the sense of harmony, and the way the land seemed to thrive under their care. John felt proud, not only of the work they accomplished, but of the life they had created together. It was a life built on mutual respect, love, and the understanding that the bonds of the heart are as powerful as any law or tradition. Over time, the women became an integral part of the community. They helped at local events, shared their skills, and even taught young children in nearby towns about resilience, courage, and the importance of kindness. Their story, the story of the flood, the rescue, and the bond they had formed with John, became an inspiration to those around them. People admired their strength, their commitment, and the way they had honored a life-saving act with a lifetime of respect and love. John often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. He remembered the fear in the women's eyes during the flood, the courage it had taken them to survive, and the gratitude they had carried through the years. He realized that true heroism is not only about brave acts in the face of danger, but also about the ability to build, nurture, and sustain connections that endure across time. Their bond had transformed all their lives, creating a family built on courage, love, and trust. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their lives. They celebrated milestones together: the first harvest of a new crop, the birth of animals, birthdays, and anniversaries. Every day brought small moments of joy: shared meals, laughter around the fire, quiet walks along the river, and conversations that deepened their understanding of each other. Life was not always easy, and there were moments of hardship, but together they faced every challenge with patience, resilience, and unwavering support. Through this journey, John discovered that life is richer when shared. The solitude he had once cherished was replaced by the warmth of companionship, the satisfaction of shared purpose, and the joy of building a future together. The women, too, found fulfillment in the life they had created with him, a life grounded in love, gratitude, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the horizon, John stood on the porch, watching the three women work together in the fields. The sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, the air warm and soft, and the ranch seemed alive with the pulse of life and love. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the bond they had forged 10 years ago in the rushing waters of a canyon had transformed not only their lives but his own. The courage, trust, and love that had brought them together continued to grow stronger with each passing day. In the years that followed, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a symbol of connection, resilience, and shared purpose. Visitors often remarked on the harmony and warmth that radiated from the property, but John knew that its true strength lay not in the land itself, but in the people who had chosen to build their lives together. The women's courage, gratitude, and unwavering support had turned a simple act of heroism into a lifetime of love and fulfillment. And so, John Miller's life, once quiet and solitary, became rich with laughter, purpose, and connection. The ranch flourished, the land thrived, and the bonds of love and friendship endured, proving that courage, kindness, and gratitude can transform lives in ways beyond imagination. The three women who had returned 10 years after the flood became more than companions. They became a family, a testament to the power of human connection, and a reminder that the most profound journeys often begin with a single, courageous act. In the end, John realized that life is not measured only by the work we do or the challenges we face, but by the connections we nurture, the lives we touch, and the love we share. The women who once clung to life in the rushing waters of a flood had returned not just to honor him, but to create a life together, one full of hope, courage, and joy. And together, they built a future that was brighter, fuller, and more meaningful than any of them could have imagined. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, now echoed with laughter, stories, and the quiet beauty of shared life. The bond formed in the most extraordinary of circumstances had endured and grown, creating a legacy of love, resilience, and gratitude. And for John Miller, the man who had once walked alone among the hills and fields, life had become a story of connection, hope, and the remarkable power of human courage and kindness.